A very, very warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all you lovely associates who are joining us from different parts of the world. Welcome to the DevOps India Summit 2022, the biggest DevOps conference in Asia. I'm your host for the day, Riya Kumar, and I heartily welcome all of you to this very exciting conference. Well, everyone, we are now joined by our first keynote speaker of the day. He is a passionate entrepreneur and has been the founder of Zero Secure, which was later acquired by Palo Alto Networks. He is now the CEO of Propelo, an engineering platform focused on DevSecOps metrics. In today's session, our expert is going to deep dive into the world of DORA metrics and give us deep insights on how they can be used to achieve engineering excellence. Without much further ado, let's all welcome onto our screens the one and only Mr. Nishant Doshi.
So again, very nice to meet all of you all, and very excited to sort of present my story and what we, more importantly, our learnings on working with hundreds of engineering leaders. This topic is really, really close to my heart, and this is a topic about sort of how do you maximize developer productivity, and why should you listen to me? Why am I talking about this, and why is this topic so important? And the reason is my first startup, Zero Secure, was acquired by Palo Alto Networks. And I ended up as a head of engineering at Palo Alto Networks, not only for my own product line, but also managing a lot of different product lines there. And as I managed a larger and larger teams, this question really became very pertinent on what are we delivering, how efficient are we, and essentially, how do we maximize developer productivity? And the pursuit of sort of like improving things, improving engineering effectiveness led me to start Propello. So, you know, today we're going to cover DORA metrics, which is a very popular framework for measuring productivity, and especially the North Star um, metrics around how each team is performing. By the way, just a very quick pause. Can you guys hear me? Okay, Ria and Brian. Okay, awesome. Sounds great. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so we're going to talk about sort of like, let's start and up level this a little bit, right? So, in my conversations with a lot of different C-level folks across the industry, there's a general perception that CEOs think that engineering teams are slow. And it doesn't matter whether it's 73%, 83%, 50%, doesn't matter. There's a general perception that engineering teams are slow, and most C-level people don't understand why they're slow. Whether it's resourcing, whether it's um, planning, whether it's sort of like execution, they just don't understand these things. And for the longest time, a lot of folks answer, this question or perception or fight this perception um, by anecdotal evidences, right? And that's where I felt like, really understanding your own data, understanding how your team is performing, and then leveraging that data to tell a true and accurate story becomes super important in this day and age for all leaders, all engineering leaders. Now, I'm going to talk about sort of like DORA metrics themselves, right? And before I talk about DORA metrics, you know, here are some questions that engineering leaders are expected to answer, right? How quickly can a team deliver like a project, right? How do we go faster? Where are the bottlenecks? You know, how are we addressing tech debt? Why is everything breaking every day? How frequently are we deploying? So they could be really tactical questions, and or they could be really strategic, you know high level questions. And again, the answer is really answering everything with data. Now, it sounds simple, like let's answer with data, but how do you sort of like, if you don't have data, if you've not managed your teams with data? And trust me, I meet a lot of teams on a day-to-day basis, and about, I would say, vast majority of engineering leaders I meet, whether they're big companies, small companies, Fortune 500, they all want to, they have the intention of sort of saying, like, I want to leverage data to kind of understand where my bottlenecks are. But very few engineering leaders, let's say 5 years back, were leveraging data. Now that number is going up and up. And really, the folks who use the data, we've seen they can actually predict better, they can sort of execute better, they meet the expectations in a much better way. So we really see that, like, this is something that is very, very crucial to how modern engineering teams, how modern DevOps teams are sort of managed, right? Now, the way you think about this data and information is really about sort of like three pillars. And I call it the three pillars of the engineering excellence journey. The first pillar is alignment. How are sort of your engineering efforts aligned with the business? And this is really, really important because if you're, you might be amazing at execution, you might be, finishing all your features, shipping on time with great quality, but if you're not working on the right things, it doesn't matter how well you're doing things. You're not aligned, and that means, like, you're not going to deliver what you really set out to deliver as a company, and more importantly, as an engineering team. The second one is, okay, now you've got alignment. How do you plan? Like, you know what you got to do. How do you plan? And as most of us know, planning is really something that is a collaboration between the engineering teams and the product managers. And really, it's about you know consistently looking at, like, your plans, looking at how you're planning, more importantly, and trying to kind of normalize that, kind of get that in the right sort of cadence. And that's something that I feel is really, really important. The third one is execution. And this is the most important sort of metric, or the most important area or dimension of your engineering excellence journey. Most organizations start here, is really focusing on, like, okay, I have my alignment, I have my plan, I know what features I need to deliver. I know I've kind of story pointed them, or use Kanban, or some sort of, like, I know exactly how much time each story is going to take. Okay, now let's execute. And then it's really about, like, okay, am I going to be meeting my plan? Am I going to be using my resources in the right way? Am I delivering with good quality? These are all questions that you need to answer as an engineering leader, as well as an engineering team. Now, we're going to talk more about the execution pillar, because that is an area where I feel like a lot of, like, focus is today with a lot of organizations. And if time permits, we'll talk about alignment and planning. But just to give you an example and give you a, like, one step little deeper into what I mean, is, when you think about these three pillars, you really need to think about inefficiencies and bottlenecks, because ultimately that's what you're sort of tasked out to do as a leader, as an engineering leader, as a DevOps leader. Your role is really to kind of, like, figure out where the inefficiencies are, and then try to kind of find a process or find a way to kind of remove those bottlenecks. So when you think about execution, there's natural bottlenecks that we've seen across working with hundreds and thousands of, like, developers and teams, right? Is like, do we have peer review imbalance? You might have one reviewer of a pull request, and you might have, like, 30 people submitting reviews, and that can be a big bottleneck. You might have bottlenecks in your CI/CD pipeline. You might have bottlenecks in your support to engineering pipeline. So your bottlenecks might be, like, moving, and as soon as you fix one bottleneck, you might uncover a new bottleneck. So really, as you think about sort of execution, you really need to pay attention to where the bottlenecks are. Then you have, like, planning and alignment. And again, there's just some examples. I won't go too deep into that. But on the alignment side, it's really about sort of, like, how much planned and unplanned activity are we doing? Are engineers working on things that are aligned? Are we working on things that sort of, like, we are not planned, and we're just doing them? And why are we doing them, right? And then also about the planning process itself is, like, are we getting a lot of scope creep? Like, are our product managers just, like, giving us requirements at the last minute, or changing requirements? Are the requirements well formed itself? Are we estimating correctly? So all of those things are really questions that you need to know to kind of run a very good team. Now, you know, we're going to focus on engineering execution. And when you think about any of these the dimensions, the very first thing you want to do is really benchmark each and every team, each and every organization in your company, or in your sort of purview. And you really want to use some North Star metrics. And of course, every team is going to be slightly different. In fact, we've never seen a company where both the teams are working in the same, or two teams are working in the same way. There might be always some differences, but you want to sort of normalize that and measure what I call the North Star metrics. And the best metrics that we've seen to measure teams from an engineering dimension is DORA metrics at this point. And DORA is a great sort of metric, and I'll talk more and more about it. I'm a big fan. You can keep, and I can keep talking about DORA all day long. And really, it's about benchmarking. The second thing you want to really do is, okay, you got a good benchmark, but why are the metrics trending the way they are? And for that, you really need to understand the insights. You want to go one or two levels deeper into saying, like, I didn't realize that, my North Star metric is X. What is the reason why it's X? And the third thing is, once you understand that bottleneck, you want to try to drive some continuous improvement process and automate that as much as possible. Or you might want to take some sort of, drive it through sort of review meetings. You might want to make some process changes. It doesn't matter what you do, but the really key word is actionability. You don't want that bottleneck to sit where it is. You want to actually address it right away and optimize. So really, I'm going to talk about DORA metrics and the North Star to measure sort of like engineering teams. These are the North Star metrics. And what does DORA stand for? So DORA stands for DevOps Research and Assessment Program. It really, I won't bore you with all the details on where it came from, but it really was written by people way smarter than me. Most of them now work at Google. And really, it was about finding a way to kind of, you know, build consistent reporting, North Star reporting, uh, across different engineering teams. So these researchers, they went out and spoke to hundreds and thousands of like engineering teams. They did a lot of research, and they came up with like four metrics, um, across two different dimensions that, according to their research, was the best proxy to understanding the engineering productivity of of any organization. And the four metrics are sort of divided into two dimensions. I think like there's the velocity dimension, and it's really about sort of how long are you taking to kind of ship product, which is the lead time to change. So it's really how long do you start when you start sort of like your process or planning process to all the way till deployment. How long are you going to, how long is it? The second one is how fast are you deploying, right? And now this metric, we'll talk more about this metric in the next few slides. The second sort of like dimension is quality, and it's saying like change failure rate. And what the change failure rate or percentage is like, hey, out of all the things I'm shipping, how much bugs and incidents am I getting back? And that's another important metric. It's kind of like signaling what is your quality. And then if no software is like, going to be 100% on quality. There's always going to be bugs that come back, incidents that happen. And then when they do happen, how fast do you respond to them? And that's your MTTR. Now, um, what sort of like DORA metrics really tell us, especially on the velocity, is like where are things stuck, right? And common areas we've seen again things stuck are PR, CI/CD. How fast are new members in your team committing? Do you have like problems in your staging environment or your QA environment? Maybe you don't have enough of environments. Maybe everyone's just waiting for a QA environment. And maybe this seems familiar. Deployment frequency, right? Like, again, every business is different. Like, I would imagine a very traditional enterprise organization may not be, want to ship every day. They might confuse their customers. Whereas someone like Facebook, they want to ship probably 5 times a day. But it's really sort of like understanding what your organization needs and then trying to like measure yourself consistently across different teams, across different time periods to make sure that you're improving. The whole concept of, I think about deployment frequency, the way I think about it is it's really shipping smaller changes fast. And we know that when we do that, we get to sort of continuous deployment. And then all the goodness that comes out of it, especially when you want to hotfix something, when you want to roll back, there's a lot of advantages of sort of shipping things faster and shipping smaller quantities or smaller sort of chunks faster. Of course, it's always dependent on your business needs. The software quality metrics is like how frequently are you shipping code with defects, and how many defects are coming back. And what it signifies is, are we building the right things? Is technical debt an issue? These are all things that sort of will be uncovered when your change failure rate is not that great. And then the last one is MTTR, and that's really important because, again, there might be so many different bottlenecks. They may not have a good resolution process. There might be areas where you're bouncing between different teams because you don't know who to go to kind of resolve this issue. You might not have pretty good sort of understanding of which services are owned by which teams. There's maybe a lot of communication gaps between support and engineering. So these are all areas ripe for sort of bottlenecks, and then that's what we need to really pay attention to. you know um, just want to do a quick check again. I'm assuming I'm heard okay. Brian, or please let me know. Okay. Awesome, thank you. Now let's talk about sort of the first sort of aspect, which is benchmarking, and benchmarking with DORA metrics. And really, it's, if you really want to do this and do this well, you got to go across different systems. You got to like get data not just from like your Git or your SCM, your source code management system. You got to get data from like all the way from your planning tool to your coding tool to sort of like all the other processes that you run as part of your deployment, and then sort of all the way till deployment is really where this sort of like this data needs to come from. So really, the lead time has to be a little more wider, to kind of make sure that you understand the bottlenecks, and you can sort of solve for those bottlenecks. We see sometimes teams saying like, well, I have cycle time, and cycle time is different than lead time. Cycle time is really about when you start coding and you make your first commit to all the way till sort of like you merge it. But that's very different than saying that, hey, my bottleneck could be in my CI/CD, or my bottleneck could be in my Jira, or my the way I'm sort of like you know moving my tickets, or waiting for certain dependencies like security tickets or something else, right? So it's really looking at it from a holistic point of view, because your bottlenecks are definitely not like restricting themselves to just Git. And the second thing is, you want to really do is really compare and analyze your teams, or compare this data by teams, by locations, by tenure, by product. Compare it side by side, roll it up, break it down by teams. All of that stuff is really, really important. Now, the second thing is really, the second piece of this is, okay, you got your North Star metric. Like, it takes 11 days to kind of ship something, and it's maybe high or maybe it's low according to the benchmarks. But really, why is it taking 17 days, right? And that's where you want to like really break it down into like different parts of your process, and really understand which piece of the cycle is taking a lot of time. Are they getting stuck in reviews? Are they getting stuck in sort of approval times? Are they getting stuck in security scans? Are they getting stuck in deployments? Where is your sort of like process getting stuck? And that's really, really important to understand. Do a quick time check. So the thing that you want to really again drill down into is like, you let's say you figure out like, hey, my PRs are the problem. Okay, now let's understand, where in your PR process are you getting stuck? Is there one on the left side? You will see like people who are submitting reviews, and the right side is where they're the people who are responsible for doing those reviews. And you can see like in this right in this picture on the right side, there's only one person doing all the reviews for most of the PRs that are sort of submitted. Or it might be that you're sort of submitting unapproved PRs, right? You might be not going through an approval process. So it's really going deeper and deeper and saying, like, it's interesting. This is an area where you really need to pay attention to. You also want to like look at like what I call, evaluate sort of alignment, right? You want to understand, like, for example, you know, where in your code base are you getting the most bugs, or where, are requirements flowing into you well? Because if the requirements are well formed, you'll be able to kind of actually deliver in a much better cadence, a much better predictable way. And then the last thing is, like, once you kind of find a problem, what you want to do is start putting processes together. Now, these processes could be like, review meetings, but what we recommend is really start automating most of like what you can. So as an example, if you find like, hey, my PRs are taking a lot of time, and or people are not, good about sort of reviewing them, you want to like have some automation to kind of go and nudge people, nudge developers, maybe give them the right data in the tools of their choice. Maybe it's Slack, maybe it's Microsoft Teams, so that you're reducing the task burden for them. And that's really, really important as well. Typically what we recommend is for an organization, when we want to roll out DORA, and we see a lot of organizations wanting to roll out DORA to their teams and to their companies, is we have a formula for success. And the formula is really not, you know um, not sort of like, doing it with one big bang, but really thinking about it in phases, right? And these phases doesn't they don't need to be like quarters. They can be like weeks or even days, but it's really thinking about it in a systematic way. So the first thing we do is, like, when we kind of work with customers, we say like, hey, roll it out for one team or a few teams versus saying like roll it out for all teams, right? And I know it says like, roll it out for all teams, but that's, the larger the organization, you want to be careful on like rolling it out for all teams. Now, let's say you do roll it out for a few teams or all the teams. You want to sort of like start with sort of like the DORA metrics, the four key metrics themselves, and then you want to like look at sort of the phase two of like, hey, um, what are the bottlenecks? And then sort of once you understand the bottlenecks, you want to start automating that. So if you have a smaller organization, you can do your entire company. If you have a larger organization, my recommendation is start with a few teams, run through the entire process, and get better at it before you expand it to the entire organization. Okay. Now, a lot of folks, um, you know, start implementing DORA. They get through phase one, two, and three, and they're like, wow, okay, this is great. This is working, but I need to do more. I need to get to more efficiency. And that's a very common thing. And really, that's when you want to start expanding scope and think about expanding it to other sort of like metrics and frameworks. Like space is a great example, as well as expanding it to across other pillars like alignment and planning pillars, as we discussed. So really, it's, for most organizations, our formula for success and what we would recommend is start with DORA at the highest level, roll it out to one team or all teams, measure, understand the bottlenecks, make those insights actionable before you kind of move into phase four and five, which is like, hey, expand scope as well as expand to other metrics like space. Um, I wanted to kind of also, again, um, reiterate that you want to expand to other sort of like phases and pillars because they're super important to improve your engineering excellence or productivity. Because if you just optimize an execution itself, you know, it will not be enough, because you might be working on the, very efficiently, but you might be working on the wrong thing, or you might not have planned properly. So it's really about like kind of expanding into other pillars, but again, you could do it in phases. And if you want to like focus a little bit on alignment and planning, then really it's about sort of like, where are people spending their time, is a very important aspect of like engineering leadership. Are they spending time on sort of tech debt? You can benchmark these different things across different quarters, across different teams. You can like double click on unplanned work or uncategorized work. You can understand sort of like if your PM teams are working in the right way, right? Are they sort of like aligned? Are they, you know, essentially giving the engineering teams good requirements? Because one, you know, I would say leading indicator of like success is the PM teams and engineering teams are very well aligned and well-formed requirements are flowing through the pipeline. And then again, if you want to look at the planning scope, like it's really about sort of like saying like, look, is my you know is my sprints planned well? Are we getting a lot of like last minute work? Are we you know really thinking about sprint hygiene? Do we have good estimation, story points? Are we missing certain fields? So you want to like start governing all these different things, so that the better requirements flow in, you're planning better, and then sort of like it leads to better execution. Now, one of the challenges, sort of like of getting accurate metrics across different organizations, all of this sounds very simple, but it's really the heterogeneity, right? Most organizations I really feel are not, operating the same way. In fact, two teams might not be operating the same way. And I always tell people you're one acquisition or one team away, one hire away from breaking that sort of like tool chain that or that standardized sort of like aspect of like your work, because you know you really need to be prepared in this world. If you want to move fast, you really need to be prepared for heterogeneity, um, and sort of like really getting different tools and different teams to work together but still getting the right insights is really important. The second is data hygiene issues, right? You really want to be careful about data hygiene issues. And you know um, I've never seen a team where hygiene is not great, or is great. I mean, you always have hygiene issues in Jira or a Git, especially Jira, but you got to work around those, right? And a lot of teams start with like, well, my data is garbage, so my metrics are garbage. But if you don't measure your hygiene and you don't start measuring, you'll never improve, and you'll be constantly stuck in that loop of like, I don't have data because I don't have hygiene, and I don't have hygiene, so I don't have good data. So you want to break that sort of cycle. The third and fourth issues are also important, like culture issues. Like you really want to like get, as leadership and as a team, you want to embrace this data-driven sort of aspect. And sometimes that data might make things a little uncomfortable, and it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say like, look, my data doesn't look good. That's okay, but I know where my problems are, and I'm going to take action. And this is something that I've seen in my leadership experience in looking at leaders who are like very more seasoned, better than me, is always about sort of like, hey, um, it's always better to be know where your problems are and communicate those problems to the top and then improve them, because that's when you know that, or they know that you know where the problems are. They know that you know your business. Um, and then really it's about sort of lack of actionability. So we can have as many dashboards as we want, as much of data as we want, but if you're not willing to take action, all of this data is sort of meaningless. So it's really about how do you interpret the data, and then how do you take action, and then how do you come back to kind of measure if things are improving or not improving, and if there's other data points that you should look at. So it's really that's where I feel like we've gotten a lot of success. And really, this is the key slide. It's like, hey, I can get DORA metrics, but can you do that across your organization? Can you look at different dimensions? Can you kind of work with all the data hygiene issues? And can you do that without sort of like spending a lot of time and effort, and really focus on improving things and making it more actionable? And that's where we see a lot of success with Propello. So again, Propello like actually works with a lot of different tools. We essentially are a layer above all your SDLC tools, and what we do is we connect with these tools and give you out of the box reports, uh, in the execution pillar, in the planning pillar, and the alignment pillar. And we do that across different teams, across different organizations. And we have the ability to kind of make it out of the box, but also be flexible enough so that we can sort of easily map your processes or your sort of like, special sort of like fields, and then reflect that in an accurate fashion. So I want to stop there and sort of like see. I know we're like have couple of minutes for questions and see if anyone has questions.
All right. Thank you, Nishant, for that very insightful session. I must say that it was a really, really good session, very informative for all of us. We do have a few questions from the audience. So one of the audience member is asking, you spoke at length about the key measurements of DORA. So the question is one metric more important than the other, or are all the metrics equally important?
That's a great question, and I'm glad someone asked that. So I think all the four DORA metrics are important because it's really about a balance, right? You don't, if you just look at one metric, it's sort of like you can, of course, it can be gamed. You're looking at only one dimension. So you want to counterbalance that with another metric. And I'll give you a live example. Like, if you kind of like ship faster, which is your deployment frequency, that's great. It might look really awesome that you're shipping faster. But as a side effect of shipping faster, it might be that your actually quality is going down. And what DORA does is you can't game DORA because the minute you ship faster, your your change failure rate is and not shipping good quality, your change failure rate is really going to show a problem there. So you want to measure all four, and that's super important.
All right. So, I mean, as you just said, all the four metrics are equally important. It's not that one is more important than the
Yeah,
other.
exactly.
Because we had one of the audience member asking, is the lead time more important? That metric of lead time?
Yes, that's a great question. Lead time is an important metric to measure. If I had to measure only one thing, I would measure lead time because that gives you an accurate measure of your velocity and especially your bottlenecks. So from a point of view of like where are your bottlenecks, I do think lead time has a lot more bang for the buck um, to some extent. But yeah, to kind of like really understand the health of the team, which is a separate question, you need to measure all four, right? So if you want to measure, like, I just want to understand my bottlenecks more quick. You're more likely to have bottlenecks in your lead time. If you want to really get a good understanding of where your team is, I think all four are important.
All right. And also, there's one more question. While implementing DORA metrics, what is the biggest challenge that you have seen so far while implementing DORA metrics in your organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest challenge in measuring DORA metrics is that you have different tools, and that's how used in an organization. They use different processes. Each one team might be using a different methodology, or might have different sort of like a different culture maybe, or even using a different sort of Git flow process or a release process. And really, it's about sort of like how do you sort of like work consistently across these different teams and still map their processes and extract the DORA metrics. That's one challenge. The second challenge is, of course, when you think about essentially, the tooling itself, that could be another aspect. People might be using different tools as well. The third challenge is the data hygiene, because people may not be actually hygienic about all the data, and may not be tracking well. And how do you work and get accurate metrics in spite of the hygiene issue? So that's another big challenge.
All right. So when you talk about data hygiene, are you talking about collecting the data that is used in the metrics? Is that
Um,
what you're
no,
referring to?
I'm talking about more like when we look at ticketing systems like Jira, right? That's a great example, right? A lot of developers, a lot of teams may not keep it hygienic. They might close or fix an issue but not change the status in the ticket. They might not fill out certain fields. They might not like put the tickets in a sprint. There's a lot of things that they may not do because they're considered to be a little cumbersome for developers sometimes, right? So when you sort of like work with any company, you're going to have things that are not, by process they're well defined, but in practice they're not. Some people are not following the process, and so therefore the data is not hygienic, because when you want to look at the data, you're you know it may not be properly tracked, right? And then how do you work around those issues? By taking that data and correlating with other sources of data to get an accurate picture. And that is where there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And that's what Propello does.
Right. So it's
And
basically reducing all the manual work required in,
yeah,
cleaning the data.
exactly.
All right, all right. That is awesome. Well, thank you, Nishant. I really, really appreciate the talk. Thank you so much for coming on to DevOps India Summit and leveling up the session with your amazing talk. Thank you so much. And for all the audience members who are joining us right now, who are seeing us right now, if you have any questions for Nishant, he's right here. You can send him a DM onto the DevOps India Summit chat itself. Or if you want to connect with him, you can connect with Nishant Doshi on LinkedIn. Nishant, if you have any other handles that you can share with the audience, they can connect with you after the session as well.
Yeah, I have Twitter handle Nishant Doshi again. So yeah, please feel free to kind of connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and happy to kind of have a conversation about your journey, and if there's anything that we can do to help.
All right, that is awesome. All right, Nishant, thank you so
Thanks a
much
lot.
for your time. Thank you for joining us. It was a really enriching experience for all of us. Thank you so
Well,
much once again.
thank you for having me and having Propello, and really appreciate all the time. And again, wishing you all the best, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Nishant. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was the first keynote session of the day. We have our next keynote session in some time, and that is by Vandana Verma. We're going to come here in a few minutes from now. Till that time, please go on to the tracks. All the three tracks are live right now. Please go on to the sessions, watch those, and come back quickly for the next keynote session. And that is also going to be live. So I'm going to join you in a few minutes from now. Till then, see you in some time.